Hey guys, I'm excited to bring this build to you today. This is a cabinet that I made to hold my CNC machine. I picked one up a couple of weeks ago and it's just been sitting on my workbench ever since, so I needed to build a cabinet to get it out of the way. What makes this extra fancy are the drawer fronts. It features 8 houses from the show or the book Game of Thrones, and it not only looks awesome, but it gave me some practice on learning how to use the machine. Now the door over here is a blank canvas. I'm not sure what I'm going to put on there yet. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll end up seeing what I do with it. But inside of or behind the door rather, you got this really big compartment for an adjustable shelf, so that way you can put something like a shop vac to run to your CNC machine or just use it as storage. Now on these doors, or the drawers rather, 4 really big deep drawers to allow me to put all kinds of stuff in there, CNC related or non-CNC related. And I use some soft close drawer slides to make that just a bit nicer. Now I installed some casters on this, so it's really simple to move in case I need to move it out of the shop or something. But this is a fun build. I think you're going to enjoy it, so check it out. Like all other cabinetry projects, we start with breaking down large sheet goods. This project required 3 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood and 1 sheet of 1/2 inch plywood. So I recently installed a set of casters on my workbench, and that allowed me to move the workbench out of the way to make room between it and the table saw to break down 4x8 sheet goods. My current method for breaking down sheet goods start with me laying down a 1/2 inch thick foam board. This foam board not only prevents my saw blade from cutting to the material, like the floor for instance, but it's also soft enough that it's not going to scratch the other face of the plywood. The process for cutting down the bottom panel, the 2 sides, and the divider are identical. I laid the board down on the foam, make a few reference marks, and then use the track saw to make the cut. Now since I'm referencing the factory edge of the plywood, I'm leaving the parts a little oversized so that I can then use my table saw to take them down to their final size, and that'll true up all of my edges. For the 4 parts I just mentioned, they were a little too large to cut to the length at the table saw, so I again had to use the track saw to cut them to their final length. The last couple of pieces I needed to cut to length were the top stretchers. These are the components that will strengthen the case and also allow me to attach the top to the case. With both stretchers cut to width, I use my cross-cut sled to cut them to the length. The divider will set in a dado not only on the bottom panel but also in the top stretchers. I'm cutting the dado at the table saw just using my dado stack. The depth is set to 3/8 of an inch, and the width of the stack needs to be the same thickness of the plywood. I start by putting in enough blades to make up 23-30 seconds, but find that it's still a little too tight. With a couple of measurements and shims, the fit becomes just perfect. The first set of dados are on the top inside edge of the side panels. Next I move the fence over and cut the center dado on the bottom panel. The stretchers are just a little bit longer than the bottom panel because they sit in the groove that's on the top of the side panels. So I move the fence over to 25 3/4 and clamp the stop block onto the fence before making the cut. To cut the groove for the back panel, I bury part of the blade in a sacrificial fence and leave the height the same. This groove is cut on the back edge of the 2 side panels, bottom panel, and 1 of the stretchers. Alright, so what we're going to do now is attach the bottom panel to the side panels, and I'm going to be doing that using some pocket hole screws. But I made one mistake. Check out this better looking grain. Now this is a side that's going to be under the cabinet facing the ground. I put the grooves on the wrong side. As you can see, this is what I'm going to see when I open the inside of the cabinet. It's not that big of a deal, but again, if I make a mistake, I'm going to show you guys so you all don't make that same mistake. Make sure you put your grooves on the better looking face of the bottom panel. Now, like I was mentioning, I'm going to be connecting the side panels to the bottom panel using some pocket holes, so I'm just going to make a few marks, probably about 6 screws per corner. You can go with 4 if you'd like, but I'm going to go with 6. So I'm just going to make 6 evenly spaced marks on the bottom for the pocket holes. Got one side done. I'm just going to rotate the board and do the same thing on the other side. Now we're going to put the side panels up and clamp them and screw them into place. So grab both of the panels, make sure you know which one goes where. This is the correct side because I put the other one up. You'll notice that the back panel, or the bottom panel and the side panel on the back side have a groove. Well, that's perfect. So now we can just slide one of these right angle clamping jigs into place, square it up, make sure it's flush here on the bottom, and then we can just clamp this into place. Again, super handy. Perfect. Remove the clamps, slide the other board up, and again, clamp it into place, and we're good. Good to go. On the right side of the cabinet, I'm going to put a removable shelf. So since I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to be storing in there, I'm just going to start the holes right on the center line. Now keep in mind, if you're going to be putting some adjustable shelves, or if you have a shelf in mind that you want to put in an exact spot, don't forget 3/8 of an inch on the top and the bottom of this inside divider is going to be buried in some dado. So you want to adjust that accordingly. But what I'm going to do is just strike a center line and then line that up with my jig. And what's nice about the jig is now that I've got the first hole, I can just stick this 1/4 inch rod in there and it's not going to move. Now I heard you screaming through the camera and you're saying, Sean, what about the side panel? Why don't you drill the holes into that before you assemble the case? And you're absolutely right. I completely forgot about that. But it's not that big of a deal. It's not the end of the world. What we're going to have to do is transfer some marks from the divider to the side wall, and then again use our jig without the edge guide on one side to drill our holes. So with the divider here in the center, don't forget the divider is going to be sitting inside of a 3/8 of an inch groove on the top and the bottom. So to make this a little bit easier, I just took my combination square, set it to the depth of the groove on the bottom, and then scribed a line on the bottom of the panel. And then I took a straight edge, measured from my mark to the center line that I drew earlier on the divider, and that gave me 15 3/4. So now all I've got to do is come over here, set this up against the side wall, make a mark 15 3/4, same thing on the front, and then line up my jig and drill the holes. To install the center divider, I first start by putting some glue in the dado. Next I clamped it into place just using a couple of clamps, and I let it set for a few hours before removing the clamps. The glue will do an okay job of holding it into place, but after it dried, I flipped the cabinet over and installed a few screws through the bottom panel up into the divider. This will definitely add a little bit more strength. I needed to get the cabinet off of my assembly table because I still had several other components to make, and the cabinet was blocking my table saw. So I installed 4 casters, one on each corner, and with a little help, got the cabinet off of my table. This is a whole lot easier to move around now with the casters instead of it being up on the assembly table. Now we're going to focus on installing these stretchers, and it's important to make sure that they're flush with the front of the case as well as the sides. And on the back, you want to make sure that it's flush with the outside edges. I'm going to be installing some 1.5" screws. I'm going to mark for center on the edges in the center and install a few of those. One thing that I often forget before I install these stretchers is to pre-drill, because that's how we're going to be attaching the top to the base. So what I'm going to do instead is drill through the top and then go underneath to do the countersinking, because the screws are going to go through the bottom. So on today's agenda, what I've got left to do is to break down all kinds of this plywood for 4 drawers, 1 door, 1 top, and 4 false drawer fronts. So enjoy this montage of me breaking down all kinds of plywood before we assemble the drawers. So what I'm installing now is a 1/4 inch spiral bit, and I'm going to set the height to 1/4 inch so that it cuts 1/4 inch deep. And then I'm also going to set the fence back 1/4 inch so that we get a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch groove on the inside faces of the drawer parts. To assemble the drawers, I'm going to be using just traditional brad nails because for my application it's strong enough. Now, one good thing about using Baltic birch for the bottoms is that this stuff is 1/4 inch thick. So it fits in there, the joinery, or the grooves rather, real snug. And as you can see, sometimes you're going to have to fight with it a little bit, but you'll get it. So I find it easier to put it on the front drawer, flip it on the side, install one of the side panels, and just keep rotating the box to get everything installed, and finally putting the back panel on last. It may look like a mess right now, but with a couple of clamps, it'll pull this thing into square and everything will fit. And the brad nailer, I just got some 2-inch brads, and I'm going to put about 4 on each corner. To install the drawer slides, I made it a little bit easier on myself by cutting some shims. I've got 3 different size shims, with the first one being 3 inches. I place it under the drawer slide and then inset the drawer slide back 1/16 of an inch from the edge of the cabinet and install the 3 screws. For the next 2 drawer slides, I use a single template that's cut to 6 inches in width. Now you can ignore the writing that's on the template because since assembling the cabinet, I feel that the drawers could be better positioned, so I modified the template a little bit. The shim for the 4th drawer slide is 6.5 inches. Again, installed the same way. To install the drawer slides on the boxes, it again couldn't be any easier with the help of templates. The drawer boxes only required 1 template, and that template was 3 and 17/32 wide. Make the template flush with the bottom of the drawer box, place the slide up against the front edge, and install the screws. Flip the box over and install the second slide, and you're good to go. To install the hinges, I used the paper template that came with the hardware. I placed the cabinet part of the template up against the edge of the cabinet wall, and then marked the crosshairs using a scratch awl. This will tell me where the screws need to be installed. To mark the top hinges, it's pretty much the same thing. I place the template up against the top stretcher, and then flush with the edge, and then again, using the scratch awl, I make some marks. To mark for the door, I first shim the door so that it's flush with the bottom of the cabinet case. Next, I transfer the center line from the templates to the door. Now I can place the paper template on the door and mark for the screw holes as well as the cup that needs to get drilled at the drill press. To remove the cup waste for the hinge, I'm using a 35mm bit in the drill press, and I've got the depth stop set so that it's going to drill 1/2 inch down from the surface. So now it's just a matter of making sure everything is square. Install the screws in the door, and then install the screws on the inside of the cabinet. Now this project wouldn't be as fun without using the actual machine to draw something cool on the blank canvas that is the drawer fronts. Since I'm a huge fan of the Game of Thrones series, I figured I would use this opportunity to draw 8 houses, 2 per drawer front. Leave a comment below and let me know which house is your favorite, but I'm all Team Stark. To install the hardware, I want to share a little trick that I saw in a Wood Whisperer video to make this process a whole lot easier. To attach the fronts, this is the cool part. I drilled through the drawer front and into the front of the drawer box and essentially attached my drawer pull on the inside of the drawer. This allowed me to pre-drill and install 2 screws to hold the front in place, and with those screws in place, I can reinstall the hardware the correct way. Pretty happy with this build. I've got the casters on it to allow me to move it around in the shop. It's got 4 really big drawers and this big compartment to store stuff. And of course it allows me to set my CNC machine on top of it. It's a build that I needed to knock out quick because the CNC machine was sitting on my workbench and taking up all kinds of space. So now I'm going to pop the casters off, set it to the front of the garage, and get to using it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit a thumbs up. If you didn't, hit the thumbs down. Leave a comment below and let me know either way. And if you're not already, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that way you'll get notified when I release new build videos. Appreciate you watching. I'll see you in the next build video. So I made the process of So I've made this calculate. Okay. Okay. You'll probably notice that I've switched bits on the end of my drill, and that's so that I can slide this over it, and it's going to help keep that in place because it's magnetic.